The envelope did not look dangerous. That was the first thing Dr. Amani Pierce noticed, and the last thing she would ever believe. It was plain, manila, unlabeled. It slid across the polished glass conference table without a sound, stopping just short of her fingertips, as if it knew exactly where to wait. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Charles River reflected the late afternoon light, calm and indifferent, while inside the executive conference room of ArcLight Biologics, everything Amani had built stood on the edge of collapse. She didn't open it right away. People often imagine that betrayal arrived loudly, through shouting, confessions, slammed doors. But real betrayal, Amani would learn, arrived quietly. It arrived with paperwork, with timestamps, with evidence that didn't raise its voice because it didn't need to. Across from her sat Maya Rios, former FBI financial crimes analyst turned private investigator. Maya's posture was relaxed, but her eyes were not. They were the eyes of someone who had watched lives detonate over far less than what sat inside that envelope. "Amani," Maya said gently, "before you open it, you should know this changes things." Amani let out a controlled breath. At 37, she was used to pressure, venture capital negotiations, regulatory audits, life or death decisions in pediatric trials. She had founded ArcLight Biologics from a folding table in a shared lab space in Cambridge. She had survived rooms full of men who underestimated her brilliance and smiled while doing it. But this felt different. She had hired Maya 3 weeks earlier for one reason only. Her husband, Ethan Kessler, had been lying. Late nights, sudden trips, a tone in his voice that didn't match the words he spoke. Amani had told herself she was overworked, paranoid, projecting stress where it didn't belong. Still, the feeling wouldn't leave. So she hired the investigator and told herself she was just looking for peace of mind. She opened the envelope. The first photograph stole the air from her lungs. It was Ethan, her Ethan, standing too close to another woman in the lobby of a boutique hotel in Back Bay. His hand rested on the woman's lower back in a way that was not accidental, not friendly, not innocent. The timestamp glared at her. 10 days ago, a night he'd told Amani he was helping a hospital system restructure. Amani swallowed. She turned the page. Another photo, another angle, another confirmation. For a split second, the world narrowed to the familiar, devastating ache of personal betrayal. The kind women had been surviving for centuries. The kind you cried over with friends and rebuilt yourself from. But then she reached the final page, and everything changed. It wasn't a photograph. It was a log, a secure access record, encrypted, time-stamped, detailed. Maya leaned forward. "That's your proprietary gene therapy folder," she said, "accessed remotely from your home network." Amani stared at the screen, her pulse roaring in her ears. "No," she whispered, "that's not possible." Maya didn't argue. She never did when the truth was worse than disbelief. "The access happened at 11:42 p.m., Maya continued. "You were in the lab. Your badge confirms it. There's only one other person with that level of clearance at home." Amani didn't say his name. She didn't have to. The room felt suddenly too small, too bright. Her mind raced, not with grief, but with calculation. If this was real, if Ethan wasn't just cheating but stealing, then this wasn't a marriage problem. This was an extinction-level event. And before the weight of that realization fully settled, before the questions, the rage, the denial could take over, Amani did something unexpected. She closed the folder. If this story already has you holding your breath, take a second to stay with it. Tap like, leave a comment if you've ever trusted your instincts and been told you were overthinking. And follow the channel so you don't miss what happens next. This is only the beginning. Amani met Maya's eyes. "Tell me exactly what you know," she said. Maya hesitated. "I need to be clear. What I've seen suggests this goes beyond infidelity, beyond intellectual property theft. If we keep going, there's no unseeing what comes next. Amani thought of the children enrolled in ArcLight's trials, the parents who had signed consent forms with shaking hands and impossible hope. She thought of the life she had built with a man she believed was her partner, and she thought of the quiet voice inside her that had been whispering for months. Something is wrong. Keep going, Amani said. Maya nodded and reached into her bag, pulling out a second envelope, thicker this time. That, she said softly, is where things stop being personal. Amani's hands were steady as she reached for it. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this silent conference room, this unmarked envelope, was the last moment of her life defined by doubt. Everything that followed would be defined by truth. The first thing Amani did after leaving the conference room was smile. Not because she felt calm, she didn't, but because she understood something essential about survival. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Panic made noise. Panic left fingerprints. And whatever Ethan Kessler was doing, it thrived in silence. Her phone buzzed as she stepped into the elevator. Running late again. North Shore meeting bled into dinner. Don't wait up. I hate missing you. Two truths and a lie. He was running late. He had been meeting people. He hated missing her. Amani stared at the screen longer than necessary, searching not for meaning, but for pattern. She had built her career on pattern recognition, on noticing what others dismissed as coincidence. That skill had made her millions. It had saved lives. And somehow, it had failed her here. She typed back something light, something normal, a heart emoji she hadn't used in months. The performance came easily, and that frightened her more than the evidence Maya had shown her, because it meant she had been rehearsing this role for a long time without realizing it. In the car, her reflection in the window looked unchanged. Same tailored blazer, same controlled posture, same woman Boston biotech magazines loved to profile as brilliant and unshakable. No one could see the fracture running straight through her center. By the time she reached home, Amani had made a decision. Not a plan yet, just a decision. She would not confront him. Not now, not soon. Confrontation gave liars a chance to adapt. Inside the house, everything looked exactly as it always had. The minimalist kitchen, the framed patent certificate on the wall, the quiet hum of a life that appeared stable because instability had been carefully edited out. Amani poured herself a glass of water she didn't drink and opened her laptop instead. She didn't search Ethan's name. That would have been emotional. She searched Northwind Therapeutics, public filings first, harmless, then investor decks, advisory boards, consulting contracts. She followed threads the way she followed genetic markers, slowly, methodically, without assuming causation before correlation. And then she saw it. A name buried in an old press release. A strategic consultant hired during a failed acquisition attempt 5 years earlier. Ethan Kessler. Her breath caught, not because the information shocked her, but because it explained too much. Ethan had always known how to speak about her work in just enough detail to sound intelligent without ever asking questions that would expose ignorance. He had always known which meetings mattered, which investors to charm, which board members to subtly undermine. She had called it support. Northwind had called it reconnaissance. The front door opened softly behind her. Amani, Ethan's voice was warm, familiar. You're still up. She didn't turn around right away. She closed her laptop first. Slowly, deliberately. When she faced him, her expression was effortless. Couldn't sleep, she said. Too much on my mind. That was truth number one. Ethan crossed the room and kissed her forehead. His scent, clean, expensive, intimate, made something twist inside her chest. This was the man who had memorized her coffee order, who had held her hand through failed trials and funding scares, or so she had believed. You work too hard, he said gently. One day you'll have to trust that other people can carry some of this weight for you. There it was. Truth number two. He had been telling her this for years. The lie lived underneath it. Amani smiled and rested her head briefly against his shoulder, counting the seconds. Not because she needed comfort, but because she needed data. His heartbeat was steady, his breathing unchanged. If guilt existed in him, it had learned how to behave. Later, alone in the dark, Amani stared at the ceiling while Ethan slept beside her, one arm draped possessively across her waist. His phone lit up once on the nightstand. A message preview flashed, then disappeared. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. Because somewhere between the second photograph and the access log, Amani Pierce had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer asking if she was being betrayed. She was asking how deeply and by whom. And the most dangerous lie of all, the one women were taught from childhood, had finally lost its power over her. You're imagining things. You're overreacting. If something were wrong, you'd know. She did know. She had always known. The only difference now was that she had stopped explaining the feeling away. And whatever Ethan and Northwind believed they were building in the dark, they had just made one catastrophic miscalculation. They had mistaken her silence for ignorance. And silence, Amani was learning, could be weaponized. Amani told herself she wouldn't tell anyone. That was the promise she made as she stood under the shower the next morning, letting the water run longer than necessary, as if heat could rinse betrayal from her skin. Silence was strategy. Silence was safety. Maya had been clear. Information was currency now, and Amani could not afford to spend it carelessly. And yet, by noon, she found herself sitting across from Nina Caldwell in a quiet cafe near Kendall Square, sunlight spilling across the table between them like a witness neither of them had invited. Nina had been in Amani's life for over a decade, long before ArcLight, before investors and patents and the relentless scrutiny that came with success. Nina knew the version of Amani who ate ramen in shared offices, who slept on lab couches, who cried in bathroom stalls when grants fell through. Nina had been there before the polish, before the armor, which was precisely why Amani chose her. I don't even know why I'm here, Amani said, fingers curled tightly around her mug. I told myself I wouldn't talk about this. Nina leaned forward, concern etched perfectly across her face. You don't have to if you don't want to, but you look like you're carrying something heavy alone. That was all it took. Amani didn't tell her everything. She was careful, strategic, or so she believed. She mentioned the distance, the late nights, the feeling, carefully framed as intuition rather than accusation, that something in her marriage had shifted. She did not say investigator. She did not say Northwind. She did not say stolen data. But she did say one thing she shouldn't have. My phase 2 data feels off, Amani admitted quietly. Not wrong enough to flag publicly, just inconsistent, like something's interfering. Nina's reaction was immediate, but subtle. A pause that lasted a fraction too long. A blink. A micro-expression Amani would have caught in a boardroom, dissected in a negotiation. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was a friend. That must be terrifying, Nina said smoothly, especially with the kids involved. Amani nodded, relief loosening something in her chest. It is. Nina asked a few more questions, gentle ones, supportive ones. How many sites? How many patients? Was Amani getting enough sleep? They hugged when they parted, Nina squeezing her a second longer than usual. Whatever's going on, she said softly, you're not crazy for noticing it. That word, crazy, landed with strange weight. An hour later, as Amani walked back toward her office, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. Stop digging, or the children pay. Her steps slowed, then stopped entirely. The city moved around her, bikes cutting through traffic, students laughing, a delivery truck honking impatiently. But Amani stood frozen, the message burning into her vision like an afterimage. Her hands trembled. Not with fear, with rage. She forwarded the message to Maya immediately. The reply came faster than expected. Did you tell anyone anything new today? Amani's stomach dropped. She replayed the cafe conversation in her mind, this time with brutal clarity. Nina's questions, the timing, the precision of the threat. Not vague, not emotional, but targeted. Children, trials, leverage. Her first mistake hadn't been trusting Nina blindly. It had been forgetting a hard truth Amani herself had once taught junior scientists. Systems fail at the human level first. When she reached her office, Maya was already there, expression tight. I didn't tell her much, Amani said quickly. Just that something felt wrong with the data. Maya nodded. That was enough. Amani sank into her chair, shame rising hot and unwelcome. This is my fault. No, Maya said firmly. It's your education. You just paid for it early. Amani closed her eyes. For the first time since opening the envelope, doubt crept in. Not about Ethan, not about Northwind, but about herself. Had she underestimated them? Had she overestimated her control? Maya's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Listen to me. One mistake doesn't lose a war. It reveals the battlefield. Amani opened her eyes. What do we do now? She asked. Maya slid a slim folder across the desk. Now we assume every word you say travels faster than you do. We document everything, and we stop thinking of this as a personal betrayal. Amani straightened, something hard settling into place inside her. Because it's not, she said quietly. Maya met her gaze. No, it's a coordinated operation, and they just confirmed something important. Amani frowned. What? They're scared, Maya said. You don't threaten someone unless they're getting close. Amani looked down at her phone again, at the message still glowing on the screen. Stop digging. She deleted it. They had misunderstood her completely because Amani Pierce wasn't digging anymore. She was mapping. And the next mistake would not be hers. The most unsettling realization did not arrive with anger. It arrived with clarity. Amani sat in Maya's car in a quiet residential street in Somerville, watching her own house from across the way like a stranger casing a target. The windows glowed warmly against the early evening dark. Inside, a life was being lived. Dinner plans, casual laughter, the careful choreography of normalcy. Maya broke the silence. I want you to understand something before I show you the rest. Amani didn't look away from the house. He's not improvising, she said. Maya nodded. No, he's been studying you. The words landed with surgical precision. Maya opened a tablet and turned it toward her. What filled the screen wasn't a single shocking image or incriminating document. It was a pattern. Dates, times, travel logs. Every time Amani had flown to a conference, Ethan's calendar cleared. Every time she stayed late in the lab, he made calls. Meetings aligned perfectly with her absences. Not coincidentally, not approximately, but deliberately. He never acts when you're home, Maya said. He acts when you're predictable. Amani's throat tightened. Predictable. The word stung because it was true. She had always prided herself on discipline, on routine, on the belief that excellence came from consistency. The same habits that had built Arclight were now being used against her. Maya tapped another file, security footage from their own home, pulled from a cloud backup Ethan had assumed no one else could access. There he was, moving through Amani's home office with unhurried confidence, photographing documents, connecting external drives, returning everything to its place with reverent care. He knew where you kept the sensitive material, Maya said quietly. Not because he snooped, Amani whispered. Because I told him. Because she trusted him. Maya swiped again. Messages between Ethan and an unidentified contact. Not overtly criminal, not enough to alarm anyone casually reading them. Just enough to show strategy. She'll be gone Tuesday. Data review window opens Friday. We move after the board call. Amani closed her eyes. Every encouraging word he'd spoken replayed itself in her mind, stripped now of innocence. You work too hard. Bring it home, you'll be more relaxed. Let me help organize things. Love, she realized too late, was the perfect disguise. What about the money? Amani asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Maya didn't hesitate. Offshore. Cayman routing through a shell consultancy. The deposits correlate with your research milestones. Every time Arclight made a breakthrough, Ethan got paid. Amani exhaled slowly. So that was it. He wasn't just betraying her. He was monetizing her. What does he think of me? Amani asked suddenly. Maya looked at her carefully. You don't want me to answer that? Yes, Amani said. I do. Maya hesitated, then spoke. He sees you as brilliant, dangerous, and exploitable. He believes you're so focused on impact, on the children, on the science, that you won't notice the ground shifting until it collapses. Amani let that sink in. For years, she had believed she was protected by her intelligence. That being the smartest person in the room was enough. That love, paired with competence, created safety. She was wrong. The house across the street went dark as a light clicked off in the living room. A shadow passed the window, Ethan moving easily in a space he had turned into a laboratory. How long? Amani asked. Maya met her eyes. At least 2 years. 2 years. 2 years of curated affection, of precision lies, of a man who had memorized her rhythms, not to love her better, but to dismantle her efficiently. Amani felt something inside her harden, not into hatred, but into resolve. This isn't about catching him cheating, she said. No, Maya agreed. It's about stopping him before he finishes the experiment. Amani finally turned away from the house. The mistake she had made wasn't trusting Ethan. It was believing she was being observed only as a wife. She wasn't. She was being analyzed as a system. And systems, Amani knew better than most, could be reverse engineered. Ethan Kessler thought he was the one running the study. He had no idea he was about to become the subject. Amani had always believed that if you followed the data long enough, it would tell you the truth. She just hadn't expected it to tell her how small her marriage had been in comparison to the machine built to destroy her. The documents arrived at dawn. Maya didn't send them electronically. She hand-delivered a sealed folder to Amani's office before the building fully woke, before assistants filled the halls and the illusion of control returned. The sky outside was pale and undecided, the kind of morning that felt suspended between promise and threat. This is everything I could reconstruct without tipping them off, Maya said, and it's worse than we thought. Inside the folder was not chaos. It was architecture. Flowcharts mapped with ruthless elegance. Timelines color-coded to mirror ArcLight's clinical milestones. Financial projections that assumed ArcLight's valuation would crater within 6 months. Amani recognized the language immediately, the antiseptic cruelty of corporate strategy decks. She had sat in rooms where lives were reduced to bullet points before, but never hers. Northwind Therapeutics had not reacted to ArcLight's success. They had anticipated it. They don't want your research, Maya continued. They want your failure. Amani traced a finger down a page labeled Phase Collapse Strategy. Sabotage the trial supply chain. Seed doubt among secondary investors. Engineer data inconsistency. Let the market do the rest. Then came the final slide. Acquisition window. Post-failure narrative. Northwind planned to step in as the savior, to rescue ArcLight's assets after its credibility was shredded, to buy the patents for pennies, rebrand the therapy, and rewrite history. Amani's stomach turned. They're planning to blame me, she said quietly. Yes, Maya replied, as an overextended founder who let emotion cloud judgment. A cautionary tale. Amani closed her eyes. She knew this story. She had watched it play out in boardrooms where powerful men shook their heads sympathetically while carving companies apart. The genius woman who flew too close to the sun, the leader who couldn't scale, the scientist who cared too much. Ethan's role snapped into brutal focus. He wasn't just an informant, he was narrative control. He tells them how you think, Amani said, what I'll do under pressure, what I'll sacrifice first. Maya nodded. He's been positioning them months ahead of you. The door to Amani's office buzzed. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The board is asking if you're joining the call early. Amani glanced at the clock. In 10 minutes, she would face the same people who had once called her indispensable. She could already hear the questions forming. Why the numbers felt unstable. Why the market was whispering. Why confidence was eroding. Northwind had leaked just enough doubt to make certainty impossible. This is the part where they expect you to break, Maya said. Or retreat. Amani stood, smoothing her jacket. Her hands did not shake. They misunderstand me, she said. Oh? Maya raised an eyebrow. I don't retreat when systems fail, Amani replied. I isolate the variables. She looked once more at the blueprint. Northwind believed control came from scale, from money, from reach. They had underestimated the advantage of being underestimated, of being close enough to the science to know where truth could hide. But there was something else, something Maya hadn't said yet. And the kids? Amani asked. Maya's jaw tightened. That's the leverage. Amani inhaled sharply. Northwind's strategy assumed a woman like her would protect the trials at any cost, that she would hesitate to expose sabotage for fear of causing panic, delays, or harm. They were counting on her ethics to paralyze her. They had designed a trap that weaponized her integrity. The intercom buzzed again. Amani, her assistant said, more urgently this time. Amani gathered the folder and slid it into her bag. Tell them I'll be right there, she said calmly. She turned to Maya. They think this is about money and optics. Maya's eyes were dark with understanding. And you? I think, Amani said, they've forgotten who clinical trials are actually for. As she stepped into the hallway, Amani felt the weight of the blueprint settle into something sharper than fear. Northwind had drawn the map to her destruction with exquisite care, which meant they had also drawn the map to their own. And Amani Pierce was done pretending she couldn't read it. The reservation was under Ethan's name. Of course it was. Amani stood outside the restaurant in the South End, watching warm light spill through tall windows onto linen tables and polished glassware. Inside, couples leaned close over candlelight, their lives arranged into neat little scenes of romance, the kind you could photograph and sell back to the world as proof that everything was fine. Ethan had chosen this place the way he chose everything lately, strategically. Private booths, discreet service, the kind of room where conversations disappeared into soft jazz and clinking cutlery. Amani's phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. Maya, I'm in position. Audio is clean. If he says anything operational, I'll flag it. Amani didn't reply. Her hands were steady as she pushed the door open. Ethan was already seated, his posture relaxed, expression bright with the practiced ease of a man who had never feared consequences. He rose the moment he saw her, smile widening as if the last few months had been nothing but ordinary stress. Hey, he said warmly, leaning in to kiss her cheek. You look incredible. Amani let the compliment land on her face like a touch she could tolerate but no longer trusted. She slid into the booth opposite him, careful with the choreography. A woman in love would soften. A woman suspicious would stiffen. Amani chose a third option, neutral. I needed this, she said, letting a small smile appear. It's been non-stop. It was true. That was the strange thing about acting. Truth made it believable. Ethan exhaled like a devoted husband. That's why I planned this. No phones, no work, just us. Amani glanced at the menu. No phones, she echoed, as if it were romantic, not tactical. Ethan poured water for her with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he still owned her perception. He talked easily, about a North Shore meeting, about systems restructuring, about investors who can't see the future the way you do. His words were velvet, his tone supportive. Every sentence crafted to sound like partnership, and Amani listened the way she listened to patient data, not for what it claimed, but for what it revealed. When he mentioned a conference call with Montreal, her pulse sharpened. Montreal. Maya had told her that name. A shadow operation, a parallel timeline. Amani kept her face soft. Montreal, huh? I didn't know you were looping in Canada. Ethan didn't flinch. Not outwardly, but his eyes flickered downward for a fraction of a second, as if checking a mental script. Then he laughed lightly. Yeah, you know how it is, he said. Healthcare doesn't stop at borders. Amani nodded slowly, as if impressed. Makes sense. Across the table, Ethan reached for her hand. His touch was warm, familiar, intimate. The same hand that had once steadied her when she doubted herself. The same hand that had signed her anniversary cards with flourishes and promises. Now it felt like contact with a polished blade. "You've been distant," he said softly, thumb brushing her knuckles. "I miss you. I miss us." It was a perfect line, not accusatory, not defensive. The kind of line that made women apologize for their own instincts. Amani almost did. Almost. Instead, she leaned into her role with deliberate grace. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering her voice. "I've just been anxious about phase 2. There it was, her test. Amani watched Ethan as she said it. Not his smile, not his words, his body. A microscopic tightening at the corner of his mouth. A subtle shift in posture, the way someone reacts to a topic that matters more than they want to reveal. Then Ethan did something that made her blood run cold. He brightened. "That's normal," he said quickly, too quickly. "Every founder hits that wall, but you're not alone. You have me." Amani held his gaze. "Do I?" Ethan laughed, as if it were flirtation. "Always." The server arrived with wine recommendations. Ethan ordered for them both, choosing a bottle with the authority of a man accustomed to controlling outcomes. When the server left, Ethan's expression softened again, almost tender. "You know what I've been thinking?" he said. "When this trial wraps, we should take a real break. Just the two of us, somewhere quiet, somewhere you can finally breathe." The suggestion sounded loving, but the timing wasn't. Amani felt it in her bones, the same instinct that had been dismissed and softened and doubted. The trip wasn't about rest. It was about removal. Get her out of Boston, off the floor, away from the lab, away from the data, while Northwind executed the blueprint. Amani forced warmth into her smile. "That sounds amazing," she said. "I'd love that." Ethan's shoulders loosened. Relief. Satisfaction. A man reassured that the world was still arranged the way he expected. Under the table, Amani's phone vibrated once. Maya's emergency signal. A single pulse that meant, "Pay attention, this matters." Ethan continued, voice lowered like a secret between lovers. "Also, I talked to someone who knows Northwind's leadership. Off the record. They're circling Amani. They smell blood in the water. We have to be careful." Amani's heart hammered, but her face remained calm. Because that was the lie inside the truth. He was warning her about the wolves. While standing among them, Amani tilted her head, letting her voice turn soft. "What do you think I should do?" Ethan smiled, pleased to be asked. "Trust me," he said. "Let me handle the messy parts." Amani nodded slowly, as if he'd just offered salvation. But inside her, something crystallized. A clean, fierce certainty. Ethan didn't love her. He managed her. And as the wine arrived, and the restaurant hummed with other people's uncomplicated lives, Amani realized this dinner was not a date. It was a demonstration. A man sitting across from her, performing devotion with flawless precision, believing the woman he'd studied so carefully could still be controlled by the oldest trick in the world. Make her doubt herself. He had no idea she wasn't doubting anymore. She was collecting proof. The call came at 2:13 a.m. Amani had not been sleeping anyway. She lay on her side in the dark, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan as it turned with mechanical patience. Ethan slept beside her, breathing evenly, one hand resting on the mattress between them, as if claiming shared territory. His phone sat face down on the nightstand, silent, innocent. Her own phone vibrated once. She slipped from the bed without waking him and padded into the hallway, closing the door with surgical care. The house felt different at night now, not unsafe exactly, but surveilled, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see what she would do next. She answered the call. "Amani," Maya said. No greeting. No preamble. "We've crossed a line." Amani leaned against the wall, cold seeping through her bare feet. "Talk to me." "It's the trials," Maya said. "Your trials." Amani closed her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, something had already begun to break. I pulled supply chain reconciliation records from a third-party distributor, Maya continued. The numbers don't match what ArcLight logged. Vials that were signed out never arrived at trial sites, and others, same labels, same serial ranges, contain compounds that don't match your formulation. Amani's breath hitched. That's not possible. The chain of custody has been compromised, Maya cut in gently, deliberately. The word landed like a blow. Amani thought of the parents she'd met during site visits. The way they clutched notebooks filled with questions. The way they watched their children with a mix of hope and terror that never fully left their eyes. What are they getting? Amani asked. There was a pause on the line, the kind that carried weight. Placebos, Maya said quietly, or inert substitutes close enough to pass casual inspection, enough to make the data fail without triggering immediate alarms. Amani slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. No, she whispered. No, no, no. This isn't just about Northwind acquiring your company anymore, Maya said. This is medical fraud, and it's ongoing. Amani pressed her fist to her mouth, fighting the surge of nausea. The room seemed to tilt, the edges of reality bending under the force of what she was hearing. How long? She asked. At least 6 months, Maya replied. Since early phase 2. 6 months. 6 months of families waiting for signs of improvement that would never come. 6 months of children deteriorating while Amani stood in front of data dashboards, trusting numbers that had been quietly poisoned. Her mind raced, pulling memories into new alignment. The inconsistent biomarkers, the unexplained plateaus, the trial site reports that never quite matched her expectations. She had blamed variance. She had blamed biology. She had blamed herself. Amani, Maya said carefully, there's more. Amani squeezed her eyes shut. Tell me. We traced where the real compound is going, Maya said. It's not being destroyed. Amani's chest tightened. Then where? To a private research facility outside Montreal, Maya said. Operating under a shell foundation. Same patient profile, same disease. Accelerated timelines. Amani felt the room go very still. They're running shadow trials, she said. Yes, Maya replied. With your therapy. The implications unfolded with brutal clarity. Northwind wasn't just sabotaging ArcLight's trials. They were ensuring her data failed while theirs succeeded. They would publish first, file for approval first, appear as the heroes who cracked the problem, while she looked like the scientist who couldn't deliver. And when questions came, when parents demanded answers, Northwind would point to her results and say, we succeeded where she failed. Amani's hand began to tremble. They're using children, she said, her voice breaking for the first time. They're using sick kids as leverage. Yes, Maya said, and they're counting on the fact that you won't expose it without ironclad proof, because exposure itself could hurt the patients. Amani pressed her forehead to her knees. This was no longer about betrayal, or marriage, or money. This was about harm. Deliberate, calculated, unforgivable. As she sat there on the floor of the house she shared with the man at the center of it all, something inside her shifted. Something primal and irreversible. Ethan had crossed a line he could never uncross. Her phone buzzed again. A text this time. From Ethan. You okay? You left the room. Amani stared at the screen, tears blurring her vision. She typed back with steady fingers. Just couldn't sleep. Go back to bed. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. She stood slowly, wiping her face, rebuilding her composure piece by piece. When she returned to the bedroom, Ethan was already asleep again, his trust in the performance absolute. Amani lay down beside him, staring into the dark. Somewhere, children were getting sicker while their parents waited for hope that had been quietly stolen. And the man breathing inches from her face was not just her husband. He was a criminal. Amani Pierce did not cry again that night. She planned, because whatever this had started as, it had become something else entirely. The crime was real now, and so was the war. Ethan Kessler was not born cruel. That was the lie he told himself whenever the guilt surfaced. Whenever, for a flicker of a second, he saw Amani not as a problem to solve, but as a person he had once loved, in a way that felt almost real. He grew up in a small town outside Cleveland, where the houses leaned slightly with age and the winters pressed in like judgment. His mother worked double shifts at a nursing home. His father, once proud, once strong, became a lesson Ethan never escaped. One accident, one bad fall at a warehouse job, one surgery that should have been routine. Then, the bills arrived. They came in thick envelopes with polite fonts and brutal numbers. They came with threats dressed as reminders. They came until his father started hiding them in drawers like shame could make them disappear. Ethan learned early that in America, illness didn't just take health, it took dignity. At 16, he watched his father, his stubborn father, sit at the kitchen table and calculate which medications he could afford to skip. Ethan didn't cry that night. He didn't scream. He made a vow instead, as cold and clean as a blade. I will never be powerless again. He was smart, charming, the kind of boy who learned quickly that people forgave almost anything if you made them laugh while doing it. Scholarships carried him out. Ambition carried him forward. By the time he reached Boston, he had rebuilt himself into a man who wore tailored suits like armor and spoke in calm, confident sentences that made others feel safe. He told himself it was progress. But power has a taste, and once you've been starved for it, you don't forget. Consulting was perfect. A world where you could walk into a room, study everyone's weaknesses, and leave with their money and their gratitude. A world where outcomes were negotiable and ethics were flexible. A world where people didn't ask what you believed, only what you could deliver. He climbed fast. Clients loved him. Partners praised him. He became someone who could look at a hospital system and see not suffering, but inefficiency, not patience, but margins. He learned to speak the language of empathy while counting the dollars beneath it. Then he met Amani Pierce. The first time he saw her was at a biotech summit in Cambridge. She was on stage speaking about pediatric gene therapy with a calm intensity that pulled the room toward her like gravity. She didn't flirt with the audience. She didn't sell a dream. She spoke like truth was a responsibility. Ethan watched her and felt something unfamiliar, respect, and something else, sharper, opportunity. Amani was everything he wasn't. Grounded, principled, brilliant in a way that didn't need applause. Her work wasn't just profitable, it was meaningful. She made people believe. Investors, doctors, parents. And Ethan, who had spent his life studying systems, understood that belief was the most valuable currency of all. Their relationship moved fast, the way high-achieving lives often do. Dinners between meetings, weekend escapes between board calls. Amani's laughter, rare and genuine, started to feel like something Ethan had earned. For a while, he convinced himself he could be the man she thought he was. But the cracks were always there. He felt it when Amani talked about the kids in her trial, her eyes bright with purpose. He felt it when she refused to cut corners even when money got tight. He felt it when she said words like ethics and meant them. He also resented her because she had what he'd been chasing his whole life. Power that didn't look like hunger. Then Graham Wycliffe entered the picture. Ethan met Graham in a private lounge at Logan Airport, the kind of place where leather chairs soften the world and everything smelled faintly of expensive cologne and controlled advantage. Graham wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. His presence carried the quiet authority of a man who never asked for permission. "You're Ethan Kessler," Graham said, as if confirming a purchase. "You're talented and underutilized." Ethan smiled politely. "I do fine." Graham's expression didn't change. Fine is what people settle for when they're afraid to want more. They talked like it was casual, like it was networking, like it was nothing. But Graham had done his research. Ethan could tell. He mentioned Ethan's father, the medical debt, the old bankruptcy filing, not cruelly, almost kindly, the way someone might mention the weather. "Arclight is impressive," Graham said, swirling his drink. Your wife is extraordinary. Ethan's smile tightened. She is. Graham leaned in slightly. Extraordinary companies don't survive on brilliance alone. They survive on scale, distribution, access. Arclight can't do what Northwind can do. There it was. The pitch dressed as logic. The theft disguised as inevitability. Ethan should have stood up, should have walked away. Instead, he listened. Because Graham wasn't offering him cash. He was offering him justification. You could help her, Graham continued softly. Help the therapy reach more children faster. Help the right people take it from lab to market. You'd be part of something bigger than one founder's pride. Ethan felt his pulse pick up. This was how it always happened. No one asked you to become a villain. They asked you to be practical, to be realistic, to be smart. What are you suggesting? Ethan asked. Graham's eyes were calm. Information, timelines, strategic insight, that's all. Arclight is vulnerable, and if it collapses under its own weight, at least the therapy won't die with it. Ethan heard himself say, I'm not a thief. Graham smiled. No, you're a strategist. That night, Ethan told himself he was doing it for the greater good. That was the first lie. The second lie came later. I can stop anytime. Because once he started, once he shared a file path here, a schedule there, Northwind didn't just pay him. They owned him. They fed him rewards that felt like relief. Debt erased. New accounts opened, doors unlocked that Ethan had always wanted to enter. And when Amani turned toward him in bed, warm and trusting, telling him about her day in the lab, he learned to nod at the right moments and ask the right questions, not because he cared, but because he was collecting. Love became camouflage. Marriage became access. Then the trial sabotage began. Ethan hadn't planned that part, not at first. When Graham mentioned supply chain adjustments, Ethan kept his face neutral and his hands clean. He told himself it was a corporate tactic, not a human one. He told himself no child would actually be harmed, that regulators would catch it, that it would all be corrected before anything irreversible happened. But the world didn't correct itself. It only escalated. And when Ethan finally realized what was happening, when he saw the internal memo referencing inert substitution and failure narrative control, his throat went dry. He should have stopped. He should have confessed. Instead, he did what he had trained himself to do his entire life when cornered. He adapted. He told himself Amani would survive. She always did. He told himself Northwind would be careful. They had lawyers. They had protocols. He told himself the children were an abstraction in a spreadsheet. Numbers, not faces. Anything to avoid the truth that was now impossible to soften. He had chosen this, not in a single dramatic moment, not with a confession in the rain. He had chosen it in increments, in rationalizations, in small betrayals that became habits. And now, as he lay beside Amani and felt her body shift away from him in sleep, Ethan stared into the dark with a strange, sick awareness. He had studied her like a system, but he had miscalculated one variable. Amani Pierce was not just brilliant, she was relentless. And somewhere deep inside Ethan, beneath the mask he wore so well, he could already feel the first tremor of fear. Not because he had done wrong, but because, for the first time in a long time, he sensed he might finally lose control. Phase 2 was supposed to be the moment everything stabilized. That was the promise, the checkpoint, the place where doubt thinned and momentum took over. Phase 1 proved safety. Phase 2 proved efficacy. Phase 3 changed the world. Amani had said those words on stages, in pitch decks, in rooms where hope had to sound credible enough to fund. She had believed them. Now Phase 2 felt like a clock with too many hands, all spinning at once. The morning after Maya confirmed the placebo substitution, Amani stood alone in Arclight's data room, surrounded by screens that pulsed with charts and curves. Biomarkers, response rates, variance distributions. To anyone else, it looked like complexity. To her, it looked like manipulation. They didn't randomize the failures, she murmured. Maya stood beside her, arms folded. No, they structured them. Amani zoomed in on a subset of patients, the ones whose decline had been fastest, the ones whose families had emailed most often, asking careful, terrified questions. The pattern was unmistakable now that she knew where to look. Same sites, same coordinators, same supply batches. Phase 2 hadn't failed. It had been steered. They wanted it ambiguous, Amani said, not catastrophic, just disappointing enough to shake confidence. Maya nodded. Ambiguity is a weapon. It makes truth debatable. Amani felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, anger braided tightly with guilt. She had trained herself to respect uncertainty, to question certainty. That discipline had been turned against her. Her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Emergency board call. 30 minutes. She almost laughed. They're accelerating, she said. Northwind's pushing. Maya glanced at the screen. And Ethan? Amani didn't answer right away. She hadn't slept, not really. She'd spent the night running simulations. What-ifs stacked on what-ifs, until dawn burned through the windows and forced the present back into focus. He knows something's shifted, she said finally. He's testing boundaries. As if summoned by his name, her phone lit up again. Heard there might be turbulence on the call today. Don't let them rattle you. Remember, perception matters more than perfection. Perception. Amani stared at the word as if it were a foreign language. That was Northwind's doctrine. Not curing disease, but owning the story around it. Not fixing the system, but shaping how its failures were explained. And Ethan was reminding her, gently, lovingly, that he was still inside her perimeter. She typed back something bland, non-committal, safe. Then she turned back to the screens. Montreal, she said suddenly. Maya raised an eyebrow. What about it? They're running phase 2 there too, Amani said. In parallel. Faster. Dirtier. No placebo. No ethics board that can slow them down. And when your data stalls, Maya added, theirs soars. Amani's jaw tightened. They'll submit first. Which means they control the narrative, Amani finished. They become the breakthrough, and I become the footnote. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it clarified something. They're rushing, she said. Maya smiled faintly. Yes, they are. Amani turned from the screens and looked at Maya fully. People rush when they think they're ahead, and when they think the other side is still confused, Maya said. Amani nodded. Phase 2 wasn't just a clinical stage anymore. It was a psychological one. Northwind believed she was reacting, patching leaks, calming investors, managing fallout. They believed she was still playing defense. They didn't know she was watching the clock, too. Here's the risk, Maya said carefully. If you expose this now, without airtight proof, you'll trigger audits, delays, panic. The kids might get the real compound faster, but your company won't survive the storm. Amani absorbed that in silence. And if I wait? She asked. Maya didn't sugarcoat it. Children stay on placebos longer. Northwind keeps running ahead. The moral cost increases. The room felt heavy with the weight of the choice. There were no clean options left, only trade-offs measured in lives, years, and truth. Amani closed her eyes. She saw the Henderson boy, 8 years old, struggling to hold a spoon steady. She saw the Patel twins, their mother asking if no change meant no hope. She saw the trust in their faces, the way they believed her because she had never given them a reason not to. When she opened her eyes, something in her had settled. We do both, she said. Maya blinked. Both? We protect the kids and let Northwind think they're winning, Amani said. We stabilize the trials quietly, no announcements, no flags, and we let their shadow operation keep running. Maya studied her. You want to feed them? Amani's expression was calm, focused. The scientist who emerged when the stakes were highest. I want to give them exactly what they think they're stealing, she said, and mark every step they take with it. The board call chimed on her laptop. Amani straightened her jacket and reached for the mouse. Phase 2 was no longer about proving efficacy. It was about timing. And Northwind had just entered the part of the trial where haste didn't save you. It exposed you. The most dangerous traps are the ones that require you to pretend nothing has changed. For 3 weeks, Amani Pierce lived inside a performance so precise it began to feel like self-erasure. She smiled in meetings. She reassured investors. She answered emails with calm authority while quietly rewriting the rules of her own survival. The countertrap demanded patience, and patience demanded silence. At ArcLight, she authorized a subtle intervention. Nothing loud, nothing traceable. Trial coordinators were rotated under the pretext of burnout prevention. Supply audits were reframed as routine compliance updates. The real compound was reintroduced carefully, selectively, shielded behind layers of verification only Amani and Dr. Hana Okoye could access. To the outside world, Phase 2 continued to wobble. To Northwind, the illusion held. And to Ethan, still sleeping beside her, still touching her shoulder in the mornings, as if affection were muscle memory, Amani appeared exactly as he expected, stressed, stretched thin, beginning to doubt herself. That was the role she hated most. One evening, as rain traced uneven paths down the windows of their living room, Ethan poured them both wine and leaned against the counter with practiced concern. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," he said gently. "You've been different lately." Amani felt the familiar tightening in her chest. This was his territory, emotional terrain he had learned to navigate expertly. "Different how?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "Quieter," Ethan said. "More guarded, like you're waiting for something to go wrong." The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. She forced a small, tired smile. "Maybe I am." Ethan studied her for a beat too long. Then he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "There's something I should tell you," he said, lowering his voice. "Off the record." Amani's pulse spiked. "I heard Northwind is preparing to publish preliminary data," Ethan continued. "Nothing official, just enough to shift sentiment. If that happens, you need to be ready." Amani's mind raced. This was not part of the plan. This was acceleration. "What kind of data?" she asked carefully. Ethan shrugged. "Positive trends, fast response times. They'll frame it as momentum." Amani felt the trap tighten. If she reacted too strongly, he'd know she had inside knowledge. If she dismissed it, he'd escalate. The margin for error was suddenly razor thin. "That's concerning," she said slowly. "Do you think it's credible?" Ethan smiled, relieved, almost pleased. That's my Amani, always asking the right questions. The praise felt like a test. Later that night, after Ethan fell asleep, Amani sat on the bathroom floor with her phone pressed to her ear, whispering into the dark. "They're moving faster," she told Maya. "I think he suspects something." Maya didn't hesitate. "Then we're close. Too close to stop now." Amani swallowed hard. "What if I push too far? What if I make a mistake and it all collapses?" There was a pause. Then Maya said quietly, "You already did make a mistake once. You survived it. This one will cost more if you don't finish." The next morning, Amani took the risk. In a closed-door strategy session, she deliberately floated a false internal projection, an altered efficacy curve seeded with believable weaknesses. It was the kind of information that would alarm a competitor and tempt them to act. Within hours, Maya's systems lit up. The honey file had been opened, copied, forwarded. From Ethan's device, Amani stared at the confirmation, her hands shaking. Not with doubt, but with the weight of proof. She had it now, the line she could never uncross. But the victory was fragile. That evening, Ethan confronted her, not with anger, but with softness sharpened to a blade. "Have you ever wondered," he asked quietly as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, "if you're too close to this work to see it clearly?" Amani's breath caught. He continued, voice calm, concerned. You've been under impossible pressure. Anyone would start seeing patterns that aren't there. Gaslighting, precise, calculated. For a split second, the room tilted. The exhaustion, the guilt, the months of second-guessing surged up, threatening to drown her. What if she was wrong? What if she had misread everything? Then she remembered the children, the data, the vials. She remembered the access log. She looked at Ethan and saw him clearly, not as a husband, not as a partner, but as a man terrified of losing control. "I've never been clearer," she said quietly. Something flashed in his eyes. Fear, anger, gone in an instant. That night, alone in her car, Amani broke down for the first time since this began. She gripped the steering wheel and cried, not because she was weak, but because strength had finally demanded its price. The counter trap was working, but it was costing her everything. And the closer she got to the endgame, the more she understood the cruelest truth of all. Winning would not mean escaping unbroken. It would mean choosing which parts of herself she was willing to sacrifice and which parts she would protect at all costs. The hospital did not smell like hope. It smelled like antiseptic and sleeplessness, like coffee gone cold and fear scrubbed into tile. Amani had walked these halls dozens of times before, usually with a badge clipped to her jacket, usually carrying optimism like a shield. Today she walked unmarked, anonymous, just another woman moving too slowly past doors that held children fighting battles they never chose. Dr. Hana Okoye met her outside the pediatric neurology wing. Hana was calm in the way surgeons were calm, not because nothing frightened them, but because fear was useless without action. Her white coat was immaculate, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharpened when she saw Amani's face. "You look like someone who hasn't slept in weeks," Hana said. "I haven't," Amani replied, "and I don't have the luxury to start now." They didn't sit in an office. Offices invited interruptions. Hana led her instead to a small consultation room with no windows and a single round table, neutral ground. She closed the door herself. Amani didn't ease into it. She laid the evidence out piece by piece. Supply discrepancies, compound analysis, access logs, the shadow trial in Montreal. She spoke with precision, the way she did when explaining gene expression to regulators. Controlled, methodical, almost detached. Almost. Hana listened without interrupting. When Amani finished, silence filled the room, thick and heavy. "This," Hana said finally, voice low, "is criminal." Amani nodded. "I know. Not just corporate crime," Hana continued. "Medical fraud, child endangerment. If this is true—" "It is," Amani said, the words cutting sharper than she intended. "I've verified it 3 ways." Hana's composure cracked for the first time. She stood and paced once, hand pressed to her mouth. "Those children trusted us," she said. "Their parents trusted you." The weight of it crushed down on Amani's chest. "I know." Guilt surged, hot and merciless. Not because she had caused the sabotage, but because she hadn't seen it soon enough. Because her trust had created a breach no firewall could fix. Hana stopped pacing and turned back to her. "Why are you telling me now?" Amani met her gaze. "Because I can't fix this alone. And because if I go to regulators too early, the trials freeze. The kids suffer longer." Hana studied her, measuring not just the facts, but the woman in front of her. "What are you asking me to do?" "Help me protect them," Amani said, quietly, ethically, immediately. Hana exhaled slowly. "We'll need emergency protocol adjustments," she said. "New verification layers, independent compounding oversight. No names on paper that can be traced back to you yet." "I expected that," Amani said. "And," Hana added, "if we do this, there's no going back. You understand that?" Amani didn't hesitate. "I crossed that line the moment I learned children were being used as leverage." Hana nodded once. "Then we're aligned." They moved fast after that, faster than Amani thought possible. Hana called in 2 colleagues she trusted with her license and her life. They worked through logistics with grim efficiency, how to replace compounds without alerting compromised coordinators, how to document everything without triggering alarms, how to create redundancy where none had existed. As the plan took shape, something shifted in Amani. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was solidarity. In the middle of it, Hannah paused, her voice softer. There's something else you should know. Amani looked up. One of our senior trial coordinators, Hannah said, choosing her words carefully, has been asking unusually detailed questions about your timelines, about your supply audits. Amani's stomach dropped. Do you think? I think, Hannah said, the breach is deeper than either of us wants. The room went quiet again. Amani felt the familiar urge to retreat inward, to shoulder the burden alone. She had always done that, carried risk privately, absorbed impact silently. But Hannah didn't let her. You don't get to do this alone, Hannah said firmly. Not anymore. Not when kids are involved. Amani swallowed, emotion pressing dangerously close to the surface. Thank you. Hannah placed a hand over hers, brief, professional, grounding. We protect patients first. Everything else is secondary. When Amani left the hospital hours later, the sky was dark, the city humming with lives, unaware of the war being fought in sterile rooms and quiet calls. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. How did your meeting go? You didn't say where you were. Amani stared at the screen, then slipped the phone back into her bag without replying. For the first time since this began, she felt something unexpected bloom beneath the fear and exhaustion. Not relief, not victory, but certainty. She was no longer standing alone in the blast radius of betrayal. She had allies now, and together, they were going to make sure the people who had turned children into bargaining chips would never be able to hide behind power, money, or lies again. The first rule of catching a thief was simple. Don't grab for what they're stealing, control what they think they're stealing. Amani learned that rule the hard way, in a windowless hospital conference room at midnight, with Dr. Hannah Okoye and Maya Rios seated across from her like two different kinds of guardians. Hannah protected children, Maya protected truth, and Amani had to protect both while pretending she didn't know her own home had become a breach. On the table between them was a plan that felt, at first glance, like a contradiction. We give them data, Amani said, voice low. Hannah's jaw tightened. We give criminals access? We give them bait, Maya corrected. There's a difference. Amani looked at Hannah. If we cut them off suddenly, they'll panic. They'll shift tactics. They'll destroy evidence. They'll move the Montreal operation faster. And our children, our patients, become collateral again. Hannah didn't like it. Amani could see it in the tension around her mouth. Hannah lived by ethics. She believed in clean lines, in consent, in safety. Feeding lies into a system, any system, felt like contaminating the very thing they were trying to save. But Hannah also knew something Amani had learned in biotech long ago. Sometimes the only way to stop contamination is to trace it through the bloodstream. Maya slid a laptop forward. This is how we do it without harming anyone. On the screen were file trees, dummy folders nested inside real ones, documents formatted to look like internal trial analyses, each one embedded with invisible markers, unique hashes, beacon scripts, access tripwires that would record every open, every copy, every forward, every screenshot attempt. Honey files, Maya said. If someone touches them, we know exactly who and how. Amani stared at the folders, feeling her throat tighten. And what's inside? Maya's eyes didn't soften. A story. Hannah glanced between them. You're manufacturing evidence. No, Amani said, the word sharp. We're manufacturing a map. She reached for the mouse and scrolled. The decoy data set was brilliant in its cruelty, close enough to the truth to be believable, flawed enough to collapse any regulatory submission built on it. It would show modest efficacy that tapered into disappointment. It would suggest a safety signal that would trigger deeper scrutiny. It would create just enough uncertainty to derail an accelerated approval. Amani could already hear Northwind's internal panic. The frantic calls, the blame, but Amani's stomach twisted anyway, because lies, even tactical ones, felt like poison on her tongue. "You're hesitating," Hannah said quietly. Amani didn't deny it. "I built Arclight on truth, and they're using your truth against you," Hannah replied. "So you have to decide which truth matters most right now." Amani thought of the children again. The parents. The fragile trust. She swallowed. The truth that they deserve to live. Hannah nodded once. "Then do it. But we document everything. Every step. If we're going to war with fraud, we do it clean." Maya tapped the screen. "Step 1 is placement. Ethan has to find it." Amani's pulse spiked at the sound of his name. That night, she returned home carrying her laptop bag like any other night, moving through the house with practiced normalcy. Ethan was in the kitchen, loosening his tie, humming softly as if he belonged in peace. "There you are," he said, smiling. "I was starting to worry." Amani forced warmth into her voice. "Long day." He poured her a glass of water. A familiar gesture that used to feel loving. Now it felt rehearsed. "I made a schedule for you," Ethan said casually. "Just to help. Your week has been brutal." Amani's skin prickled. "A schedule?" "Yeah," he said, tapping his phone. "You've got 2 site calls tomorrow, then a board prep block. I thought we could grab dinner after. You need something to look forward to." His knowledge of her calendar should have been impossible, unless he'd never stopped watching. Amani nodded, letting gratitude shape her expression. "That's sweet." Then she walked into her office, opened her laptop, and did the most unnatural thing she'd done in her entire career. She planted a lie. She placed the honey file inside a folder Ethan already knew existed, one he had referenced before under the guise of helping her organize. She labeled it with the kind of boring, technical name that would seem irresistible to someone hunting for leverage. Phase 2, Efficacy Trend Analysis, Final, .xlsx. Final. The word was a hook. Amani left the laptop open. Not obviously, just enough. A subtle invitation. Then she walked out, heart pounding, and joined Ethan on the couch as if her world wasn't splitting at the seams. They watched a mindless show. Ethan laughed at the right moments. He rested an arm around her shoulders. He kissed her temple, soft and familiar. Amani kept her breathing even, her body relaxed, her mind screaming, "Please take it. Please take it. Please show me who you really are." Hours later, when Ethan finally went to bed, Amani stayed up, pretending to answer emails. She waited until the house was quiet, until the only sound was the refrigerator's hum and the distant sigh of traffic. Then her phone vibrated. Once, twice, 3 times. Maya's system alerts. Honey file accessed, copied, forwarded. Amani stared at the notifications, her vision blurring. The timestamp confirmed it. Ethan had done it while she sat beside him, under his arm, while his mouth whispered affection into her hair. Amani pressed a hand to her chest, as if she could hold her heart in place. Hannah's voice echoed in her head. "Which truth matters most?" Amani wiped her eyes, inhaled slowly, and opened the audit trail. There it was, clean as a fingerprint. Device ID, user profile, transfer route. The lie had traveled exactly where she wanted it to go. And now, because they had fed the thief, they could finally follow him home. The boardroom had never felt this quiet. 12 people sat around the polished walnut table on the top floor of Arclight's headquarters, each of them powerful in their own way. Venture capital partners, former regulators, industry veterans who had built and broken companies before Amani Pierce had written her first line of code. The walls were glass, the city spread beneath them like a living circuit board, unaware that something irreversible was about to happen inside. Amani stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the back of her chair. She had not slept the night before, not from fear, but from precision. Every word had been weighed, every document placed in order. This meeting was not about emotion, it was about control. "Thank you for joining on short notice," Amani began, her voice steady. "I'll be direct. There are irregularities in our Phase 2 trial that cannot be explained by variance, execution error, or biology. A murmur rippled through the room. One board member leaned back, folding his arms. We've discussed data noise before. Yes, Amani said calmly, and this is not noise. She tapped the screen behind her. Charts appeared, clean, elegant, undeniable. Supply chain logs, batch numbers, access timestamps. These discrepancies indicate deliberate interference, she continued. Specifically substitution of inert compounds at multiple trial sites. The word deliberate landed hard. That's a serious accusation, another board member said sharply. Are you suggesting sabotage? I'm stating it, Amani replied, and I'm prepared to substantiate it. Before anyone could respond, the door opened. Ethan Kessler stepped inside. He looked surprised, but not shocked. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed he belonged in every room he entered. I'm sorry, he said smoothly. I was told this was an internal discussion. I didn't realize. Amani invited me, one of the investors said. Given Ethan's role liaising with strategic partners, I thought transparency was appropriate. Amani did not look at her husband. Her heartbeat remained slow, controlled. Good, she said. Transparency is exactly what we need. Ethan smiled faintly and took a seat, his eyes flicking to the screen, then back to Amani. Curious, assessing, she continued. Over the past 6 months, ArcLight has experienced systematic data degradation that correlates with specific supply batches and access events. Independent verification confirms that some patients did not receive the intended compound. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone swore under their breath. This exposure creates regulatory risk, Amani said. But it also reveals something more concerning. Coordinated extraction of proprietary data. Ethan's jaw tightened, just slightly. A board member turned to him. Ethan, were you aware of this? Amani answered before he could. Yes, she said. He was. The air left the room. Ethan laughed softly, the sound polished and incredulous. That's not true. Amani finally turned to face him. I didn't say you sabotaged the trials, she said. I said you were aware. She clicked the remote. A new slide appeared. An audit trail, device IDs, file access logs, transfer routes. Silence swallowed the room whole. This data, Amani said evenly, was accessed from a personal device registered to Ethan Kessler. It was copied, transmitted, and forwarded to an external server associated with Northwind Therapeutics. One investor stood abruptly. Northwind? Ethan's face drained of color. This is absurd, he said, standing now. Those files could have been manipulated. Amani's under extraordinary stress. Sit down, Amani said quietly. The authority in her voice was absolute. Ethan froze. She continued, her tone surgical. In anticipation of denial, we embedded digital markers into decoy datasets. Those markers appeared in internal Northwind communications 48 hours later. She paused, letting the words sink in. You didn't just access my work, she said, looking directly at him now. You monetized it. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, a crack, a way out. None appeared. A board member spoke, voice trembling with fury. You're saying our CEO's husband is a corporate spy? I'm saying, Amani replied, that ArcLight has been targeted by an acquisition strategy designed to manufacture failure, discredit leadership, and extract value through sabotage. And the children? Another voice asked. The patients? Amani's composure finally fractured, not into weakness, but into something sharper. They were used, she said, as leverage. That did it. The room erupted, questions overlapping, outrage breaking through professional restraint. Someone demanded law enforcement. Another demanded resignations. Phones appeared. Voices rose. Through it all, Ethan stood frozen, his carefully constructed reality collapsing in real time. Amani watched him, Not with satisfaction, not with hate, but with clarity. This was the cost of studying someone without understanding them. She raised her hand. Silence fell again, almost instinctively. "We will cooperate fully with regulators," Amani said. "We will protect our patients, and we will not allow ArcLight to be dismantled by people who believe intelligence is something they can steal." She looked around the table. "This board must decide," she concluded, "whether it stands with the truth or with a narrative built on betrayal." No one spoke. Then the chairwoman cleared her throat. "This meeting is adjourned," she said. "Security, please escort Mr. Kessler out." Ethan turned to Amani as guards approached, his voice low, urgent. "You have no idea what you've started," he whispered. Amani met his gaze, unflinching. "I do," she said, "and so do you." As the doors closed behind him, the boardroom remained silent, stunned, shaken, irrevocably changed. The detonation had not been loud. It had been precise. And there was no rebuilding what had just been destroyed. The first arrest did not happen in handcuffs. It happened in silence. Ethan sat alone in a small interview room at the federal building in downtown Boston. Hands folded neatly on the table, posture impeccable. He had asked for a lawyer the moment security escorted him out of ArcLight. He had told himself this was temporary, an overreaction that would settle once emotions cooled and adults took over. That belief lasted exactly 7 minutes. The door opened. 2 agents entered. One set a recorder on the table. The other placed a thin folder in front of him without a word. Inside were transcripts, emails he had deleted, transfers he had routed through shells he'd been assured were untraceable, time-stamped access logs paired with Northwind internal memos. His language mirrored back to him like an accusation. Ethan's mouth went dry. "This is a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "I was consulting strategically." The agent didn't argue. He slid one more page across the table. A photo, a child in a hospital bed, a chart beside it, a red line trending downward. "Do you know what placebo substitution is?" the agent asked. Ethan looked away. That was the moment the mask cracked. Not dramatically, not with shouting, but with the quiet collapse of a man realizing his justifications no longer had an audience. Across the city, Amani sat in a different room, surrounded by people who had once questioned her judgment and now waited for her direction. Regulators, hospital counsel, federal investigators. The weight of their attention pressed in, heavy and unrelenting. "This will get ugly," one attorney warned. "They'll try to paint you as negligent, complicit by proximity." "I know," Amani said. "And your husband is irrelevant," she replied evenly. "The children are not." That clarity steadied her when everything else threatened to shake loose. By nightfall, the story broke. Not the whole story, never the whole story, but enough. Biotech sabotage investigation, corporate espionage allegations, trial irregularities under federal review. Ethan's name followed soon after. He watched it unfold on a muted television in a holding room. His reflection ghosted over the headlines. Messages flooded his phone, some frantic, some furious, some gone cold. Northwind's legal team had already cut contact. Graham Wycliffe's number returned nothing but voicemail. For the first time in his life, Ethan had no leverage left to trade. When they finally put the cuffs on him, he didn't resist. He looked small then, not because he was weak, but because the story he had told himself for years had finally run out of room. Amani heard about the arrest from Maya. "They've got him," Maya said simply, "and they're rolling up the rest." Amani closed her eyes. She felt no triumph, only grief, for the man she thought she knew, for the marriage she had built on incomplete data, for the version of herself that had believed love alone could keep her safe. That night, Ethan was allowed one phone call. He used it on her. She answered. "Amani," he said, his voice stripped bare. "Please, you don't understand. I never meant." She listened. She owed him that much. "I told myself it was bigger than us," he continued, "that it would help more people in the long run, that you'd land on your feet. You always do. Amani felt something inside her go very still. You used children, she said quietly, as leverage. I didn't touch them, Ethan said desperately. I never saw them. I never. That's the point, Amani replied. You didn't have to. Silence stretched between them. I loved you, he said finally. Amani closed her eyes. I know, she said, but love without responsibility is just appetite. She ended the call. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread fast and far. Northwind's Montreal facility was raided, servers seized, trials frozen. Executives lawyered up and turned on one another with stunning speed. Graham Wycliffe was arrested at a private airfield outside Toronto, halfway up the stairs to his jet. The narrative Northwind had planned, to paint Amani as unstable, overextended, incompetent, collapsed under the weight of evidence. Instead, a new narrative emerged, one no amount of money could smother. A woman who trusted her instincts, a scientist who protected children, a system exposed by its own arrogance. But the reckoning wasn't only legal, it was personal. Late one night, alone in her apartment, Amani sat on the floor amid unopened boxes, pieces of a life she had yet to decide how to rearrange. She let herself feel it then, the anger, the sorrow, the humiliation of having been studied, exploited, underestimated. She did not numb it, she examined it. Because this was the final cost of clarity. You don't just lose the lie, you lose the comfort it provided. And when the world finally went quiet again, when the arrests were made and the headlines moved on, Amani understood something essential. Justice had been served. But more importantly, illusion had been destroyed. And nothing, no apology, no sentence, no redemption arc, could ever put that back together again. 6 months later, the silence felt different. Not empty, not fragile, clean. Amani Pierce stood alone in the ArcLight lab, long after the lights in the surrounding offices had gone dark. The machines hummed softly, steady and obedient, the way systems should behave when they were no longer being sabotaged. On the central screen, updated trial data glowed in calm certainty. This time, the numbers told the truth. The children were improving, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Biomarkers stabilized. Cognitive decline slowed. In some cases, cases that once felt impossible, function returned. Parents cried in hospital corridors. Doctors recalibrated their expectations. Hope, once rationed, began to breathe again. ArcLight survived, stronger than before. Northwind did not. Its name became shorthand in regulatory circles for arrogance exposed. Executives were sentenced, shell companies dissolved. Policies changed, not because people suddenly became moral, but because consequences had finally become unavoidable. And Ethan Kessler, he faded. Not into redemption, not into legend, into paperwork, into case files, into a cautionary footnote beneath a much larger story. Amani did not visit him. She didn't need closure from the man who taught her the most important lesson of her life by betraying her. The real transformation had happened quietly, long before the verdicts. It happened the day she stopped explaining her instincts away. Now, she trusted herself without apology. She no longer softened her language in boardrooms. She no longer second-guessed discomfort. When something felt wrong, she investigated. Not because she was suspicious, but because she was responsible. Responsibility, she had learned, was the truest form of power. On the wall near her desk hung a simple, framed note, handwritten by a mother whose daughter had been part of the trial. Thank you for believing something was wrong when everyone else told you it was fine. Amani touched the frame lightly, then turned back to her work. There would be more fights ahead, more systems to challenge, more people who mistook confidence for aggression when it came from women who refused to be managed. But she was no longer afraid of that, because the woman who once wondered if she was overreacting was gone. In her place stood someone unshakable, someone who understood that trusting yourself isn't arrogance, it isn't paranoia, it's survival. And sometimes, when the cost of doubt is measured in lives, it's courage. If this story moved you, stay with it. Like the video, leave a comment if you've ever been told to ignore your instincts. And follow the channel for more stories where truth, justice, and quiet strength win in the end. Because somewhere out there, someone is doubting themselves right now, and they need to know what happens when you stop.